Hello everyone, today we are diving into the cutest thing you ever seen on the channel, a sushi cat. We are going to create it together. I will walk through my whole process, how I modeled it, how I texture it, and set everything up for a nice little render. I'm also thinking that it could be really fun to animate in the future videos, so feel free to drop all your ideas in the comments. Alright, now get ready for maximum cuteness in this video. Let's go! So the goal of this build, with our sushi cat, is to start by creating some basic blocking shapes. From there, we will merge everything together, at least the main part that can be assembled at this stage. Then, using the sculpting tools, we'll refine and polish the overall shape. Finally, we'll go through a Retopology pass to get a clean final mesh, ready before moving on to texturing and the final rendering. So we start with a cube that I would like to subdivide by 2. I apply the modifier and then I begin adjusting the shape by scaling along different axes to get that small sushi ball look that I'm aiming for. I also flatten the bottom parts using the proportional editing tool, which allows me to influence the surrounding edge and faces as I make adjustments. For our little sushi cat, I start blocking out the main shapes using simple primitives, mostly spheres that I move around, scale, and adjust as needed. I also use the proportional editing tool to smoothly influence the overall shape and keep everything feeling organic. Don't hesitate to rely on specific tools like Shrink Flatten based on your vertex selection to push that fluffy, slightly exaggerated look. Then, I place this blocking shape underneath the body, and with a mirror modifier driven by an empty, I can accurately and cleanly mirror the piece. Next, we move on to the ears. I'm following the same approach, starting from a primitive, in this case, a cube. I scale it down and I place it roughly where the ear should be. Then begin adjusting the vertices and edges to match the shape I'm looking for. By adding a few extra edge loops, you can start refining the silhouette and get that nice, cute ear shape. Then, just like before, I add a mirror modifier to create the other side automatically. I also like to add a subdivision modifier at this stage, just to preview how it looks with more geometry and smoother surfaces. After that, I am testing things by duplicating the front paw and placing them in the back. Yeah, it looks good, but in the end I will adjust that, of course. And I think I'm going to get rid of them eventually. Next up is the trap that will hold the body and the salmon parts. For that, I'm starting from the body mesh, selecting the part I want, and by pressing Shift plus D, I'm duplicating it. Then I'm separating the piece with P. From there, I'm going to start shaping it, adding edge loop, and adjusting everything using the proportional editing tool to get the shape I want. It's just a rose blocking that I will refine later. To get a clearer vision of it, I'm adding 2 modifiers. First a subdivision, then a shrink wrap to match the overall shape of the body underneath. Now, let's handle the tail. For that, I will use the curve. I'm taking a basic curve, and in delete mode, I'm going to delete all the points. Then I will switch to draw mode with surface snap activated. In the curve settings, I'm going to add a bit of depth, and then I can start drawing directly on the body of our little cat to define the shape I want for the tail. From there, I can start adjusting things, adding some bends, tweaking the tension, and so on. Pressing Alt plus S will allow me to add thickness to specific parts of the curve. Then I'm just fine-tuning the transform a bit. Final step here is to convert it into the mesh using right click. What I like to do is to keep the original curve as well, so I can still edit it later if needed and convert it to a mesh. And here we are! Next is the sushi part, the salmon top piece. I'm starting with a simple plane and adjusting the shape, making sure I have the shrink wrap modifier so I can easily protect everything into the surface. Then, in edit mode, I'm tweaking the vertices and I'm refining the shape. I'm using the same method as before by adding subdivision modifier to get cleaner results. Once I'm happy with the rose shape, I apply the modifier to get a solid base. From there, I extrude everything to get the thickness I want. And I also start using the Sculpt tool in Sculpt mode to really refine the shape and push it closer to what I'm aiming for. As you can see, that gives me the rose placement and form of the sushi piece. Then I go back and adjust the strap around it to fit this new piece properly. After that, I wanted to add a bit of wasabi on the top of his little head. For that, I decided to explore another workflow using metaballs. Metaballs are a specific type of object that are really fun to play with, and they let you adjust rose shapes without having to dive into a sculpt mode too early. What you do is simply place the first ball where you want it, and then by selecting the sphere, you can duplicate it with the Shift plus D to add another one. It will still keep the connection between them, almost like you're playing with clay. So I'm trying to get the overall shape I want, and in the end I will have 3 main parts making up the wasabi. When that's done, I select everything and I convert it into a mesh. This creates a single combined place that I need. To adjust the resolution, I can use the remesh tool, pressing R to change the resolution by sliding the mouse. Then with Ctrl plus R, I can readjust and refine it. Basically, resetting and improving the topology so I can start sculpting again on a cleaner surface with high subdivision. It's a pretty dynamic workflow in Blender, similar kind of ZBrush if you're familiar with it. Then I just keep iterating, adjusting the remesh, and using Sculpt tool to refine and push the shape where I need it. So now I'm going to merge all the pieces I want together, remesh them, and go back into Sculpt. But first I'm organized, so I reorganize my scene by adjusting collection, naming the mesh properly, and so on. Just to recap the Sculpt and remesh workflow, let's do an example on the body. First, I make sure to apply subdivision modifier I had on it. Then, on the body, the steps I'm going to repeat are first, making sure the symmetry is enabled on the correct axis. From there, I use the remesh tool and define the voxel size I need. Then I apply it to the mesh. By pressing R, I adjust the voxel size and overall resolution, and with Ctrl plus R, I confirm and apply this new resolution to the mesh I'm currently working on. As you can see, with the wireframe on, I now have a new topology density. From there, I can start sculpting, and whenever I need, I can press Ctrl plus R again to refresh the remesh and get a smoother, more even distribution of faces across the mesh. And this is a workflow I'm going to use for all the next steps when merging and sculpting the different blocking pieces. So now I'm going to leave the body aside for a moment and focus on the pose. I'm adding a bit of subdivision to get a cleaner, smoother shape, and I'm going to apply it to have a proper base. Before moving forward, I also make sure to apply all transform to get a clean starting point with the reset values, to avoid any issues later on. Then I join the pieces with Ctrl+G and switch into sculpt mode. I set everything to the default size and use Ctrl+R to remesh and give the model a new resolution. From there, I start sculpting and adjusting shapes. Once I have a clear idea of the pose, I can join the pose and the body together and reuse the same workflow. For example, adjusting the resolution with Ctrl+R, then refining and smoothing the overall forms. In the end, I'm going to get rid of the back pose, like I mentioned earlier, so I'm really focusing on the front pose and making sure I get a clean result here. The goal here is to end up with a one solid and unified piece. Next up is the same process for the ear, merging, joining and sculpting with the resolution I need to get the final shape. I really want to push this sushi cat to the end, so it's mainly just sculpt mode work, adjusting everything as I go. I'm not even using a graphics tablet, just my mouse, so you can still get really clean results without needing a heavy hardware setup. Again, the same process for the tail. I make sure I have a proper subdivision first, and then I'm going to join and merge the pieces. From there, I switch into sculpt mode, using the remesh tool to properly combine everything and smooth out the transitions between the parts. Next, we need to handle the top salmon sushi parts. So I start by blocking out the shape first, then I join and merge the pieces and switch into sculpt mode to smooth everything out and get a nice uniform form. I'm mostly using the side brushes throughout, mainly the clay-like or grab brush to build up the volume. Then a flattened brush to create clean, even surfaces where needed. I also keep switching between the smooth and move grab brushes to refine the shape progressively. The goal here is to maintain a clean and clear separation between the bottom sushi base and the top salmon piece, of course while keeping a nice, readable transition between both elements. I'm readjusting the strap sushi part after all those modifications. I'm not going to apply any sculpt or remesh operation on it. I'm just going to stick with the subdivision and the initial topology because it was clean enough and that should be sufficient. In sculpt mode, I'm mainly using the grab brush just to move the shapes around without applying any mesh. So I need to keep this clean topology in order to maintain a nice and control strap. Now that I have the merged and unified sculpted piece, I can start the retopology. So briefly, what we've just created is a high poly version of our sushi cat, and now I can move to the Retopo to build a clean, low poly mesh with a proper edge flow and topology. I'm going to use the same setup I used in the previous workflow, which you can also find in a recent video on our character retopology using the Polyquills free add-on. It's basically the same approach here, so if you want to go deeper into the tool and topology theory, I recommend checking that video as well. I start by creating a new plane and deleting the face, so I'm left with an empty base mesh. Then I make sure I have a raw symmetry axis that I can rely on and display. I also use the annotation tool with surface snapping enabled, which is something I cover in the same video I mentioned. From there, I begin placing everything and start using the body quill tool. I don't have a perfect symmetry because of the tail, so I'm going to rotopo without relying on the mirror modifier. Then it's just a standard retopology process over the entire mesh, starting with the ear and moving step by step. I always start low and gradually increase the density as needed. It won't be perfectly symmetrical, but that's completely fine since we are going to move into animation later on, and we don't need the same level of complex deformation as a full character like in the previous video. So we can afford to be a bit more flexible with the final topology on this body. I'm continuing with the rest of the body, focusing on the left side, going down towards the tail, then the front paws, and trying to connect all the different areas with a simple but effective topology as best as I can. Then, from the front paw, I'm going to use the same setup I used in the full character topology video. From there, I'm just going to extrude everything without surface snapping enabled. And using a string wrap modifier, I can adjust and refine the final shape I need. So to properly use our shrink wrap modifier, I'm going to create a vertex group that allows me to target only a specific area with the modifier. Then I can smooth out certain parts and refine the shape. In the end, I'm going to apply the modifier to establish the base I need, and then continue adjusting the topology. I'm also still using the polyquill tool, which is really great and super useful for this kind of work. This helps me to complete the upper parts of the cats, including the ear. It's the same process for the ear, extruding the edge loop and then using the shrink wrap modifier to refine the final position. Once one side is done, I make sure everything is clean, then select the center line. By using S plus X, I align the vertices perfectly along with the axis so I can mirror it properly and ensure symmetry for the other side of the cat. So to quickly mirror it without diving into the modifier stack, I'm just going to Shift plus D to duplicate the model and then Ctrl plus M on the X axis to mirror it. As you can see here, I will need to clean up the tail area because it's not perfectly symmetrical. So I'm going to delete those faces and manually adjust this selection. Of course, I take my time to refine everything, and it doesn't need to be perfect. As I mentioned, since we don't really need a perfectly clean topology in that area. That will be completely enough with just a bit of patience and manual work. Once I've got the other side, I'm going to merge the two sides together. First, I adjust all the edge loop on the left and right side to get a perfectly aligned line. Then I select both edge loop and scale them on the X-axis to bring them together. After that, I use the merge tool with merge by distance. As you can see, I get some weird artifacts on the normals, and that's because one side is flipped. So in edit mode, I select the face and press Shift plus N to recalculate and fix the orientation. On the back parts, I still have some cleanup to do. So I go in and merge the vertices manually. Polyquil is great here because I can move vertices around and they automatically snap and merge, which makes the cleanup much faster. I also redo some topology in that area to get something cleaner and more consistent. Once that's done, I make sure I have at least one subdivision modifier in place. On the front pose, I don't quite have the exact shape I need, so I reuse a shrink wrap deformer to recover the nice high poly shape I had from the sculpted mesh. And there we have it, our Retopology body from all the combined high poly pieces. It's simple but clean, and now it's ready for the next steps. UV and wrapping will also be much easier from here. Alright, so for the other pieces, the strap is already retopologized at some point because we started from a nice and clean base. But for the wasabi ball, I'm not going to do it by hand. Instead, I'm going to use the remesh tool from the vertex section. It's kind of a hidden feature, but when you go there and use the quadriflow remesh tool, you just have to specify a rough target number of faces, and then you can remesh it in one go. It's a hidden gem, really powerful and very straightforward. I think it's a bit like a Z-remesher in ZBrush. And that's more than enough for me. I'm going to replicate the same process on the other wasabi part to get back that nice, spherical and smooth shape. I'm also using a subdivision modifier and shrink wrap to recover the original high poly sculpt form. Anyway, that gives us nice topology almost everywhere across our Kochi cat. Then I'm just going to readjust the strap part of our sushi cat again, using sculpt mode to make sure I don't have any intersections between the meshes. I want really something thin, without unnecessary thickness, but still properly projected and matching the underlying shape of our little cat. And that's it. We end up with a really nice low poly, subdivided, clean and good looking sushi cat. So now, before moving into outlines, grid pencil and texture, I'm first going to create a funnel looking version of our scene in Eevee. First I add a ground plane, then I switch to render mode and I stay in Eevee without changing anything specific in the render settings. The only thing I adjust here is through the viewpoint shading menu, making sure everything is displayed as it should be by default. Next, I switch to shader mode in bottom right, I go into the world shader, and from there I duplicate the background node and use a light path node with the ease camera ray output. I plug everything into a mix shader using the ease camera ray output as a factor. With that setup, I can control both the background color and the ways the assets are tinted in the scene. I'm a girl, so I'm going for a nice, soft pink tone while keeping the first background nodes white. This setup is something you can reuse to achieve a flat, style shaded look for any of your portraits. After cleaning up the scene and background, I'm going to focus on the mesh itself. I'm just going to add a simple material and change the base color only. That will be my rose foundation and it's mostly what I'm going to stick with since it already gives us a good final look. You can see this white reflective highlight at the top and bottom of the sushi cat. That's come from the specular which is affecting the final look of the material. So I'm planning to adjusting it depending on the areas, keeping some reflection where it makes sense, and removing them completely in other parts using the specular setting and the IOR value. I'm also adding a very simple shape for the shadow. Then I just tweak the alpha and adjust the color to something similar to the ground, but slightly darker. Here, that's more than enough to get a believable shadow. So now, for the outline effect, after setting up the scene and main material for image, the first thing I do is create a new collection where I'm going to place all my grease pencil setup. Then I make sure to deactivate the other collection I don't need for this part of the scene, because otherwise it can quickly clutter the viewports and make things harder to manage. For this setup, for example, I'm only keeping my Retopology mesh and the main scene collection visible. Next, I make sure to create a camera and I enable camera lock so that when I remove around, I'm actually moving through the camera view and not just the scene independently. That's important because the outline effect is camera based. From there, I add a grease pencil object, and in Blender you can use the line art setup, which automatically generates outline for your scene in one click. And as you can see right away, it already gives a nice result. Inside the grease pencil setting, there is a layer by default and a line art modifier. I go into the modifier and change the source type to collection. Then I target my Retopology collection. After that, I just increase the light thickness slightly to get a strong outline, and that's basically it. And as you can see, it's really simple to set up an outline effect in Blender. Just to keep in mind, it's camera based, so you need to stay in camera view to properly evaluate the result while moving around the scene. So next, for the body, I won't use the grease pencil stylized shading here because I want to cover a large area in 3D, so it's not the best workflow for this part. Instead, I unwrap in some very basic UV by hand. It's really worth and not perfect, but it's more than enough to start with. You can see I've defined the top and the bottom area, as well as a midline to mark the symmetry axis of the mesh. With that done, I go back into the material for the body and add an image texture node. I create a new texture, name it properly, and set the resolution to something like 2048 by 2048. And as you can see, I start with a blank white image. I plug that into the shader, and this becomes the base I need to start texturing directly inside Blender. You can also do this through the texture painting workspace, but I prefer setting up manually because it gives me more control and better understanding of what's happening. I switch to right frame view to better see where I'm painting in relation to the topology, and then I go into texture paint mode. On the left here, I select my brush, pick a color, and start painting directly on the mesh. It's as simple as that. You can enable symmetry on the top right panel, and in the stroke settings, you can also enable stroke stabilization, which gives you a kind of lazy mouse effect for smoother, cleaner strokes. I start with basic color blocking, but you can also begin with a black and white mask, which is often better if you want to control everything later in the shader. That's actually what we are going to refine later on, using this as a mask to adjust color and intensity directly in the shader editor. In this case, I don't fully rely on symmetry everywhere, especially on the front part, so I also paint some areas by hand. It's really just a matter of taking the time to paint. And of course, one important thing in Blender, don't forget to save your image you created. Otherwise, you can lose everything you've painted. You can spend hours working on the texture, and if you don't save it, it's gone if you are not lucky. So if you started with a color like I did, you can use the setup I'm showing here to turn it into a mask. You separate the color information and then use it as a factor in the mix, which allows you to plug in the color you want and adjust another color on top of it. If you start with a black and white texture instead, you won't need this setup. But if you do it the way I did, that's something to keep in mind. So I'm going to adjust everything here directly in the shader editor. Next, I'm diving back into grease pencil, so I'm going to create a new blank grease pencil object. This will be used for some extra details, like the front paws where I want to draw the lines between each toe. I'm going to do it by hand using the curve tool. On the first click, then a second click on the first point while holding and dragging. I can adjust the curve and fine-tune the tension as needed. Then I press enter to validate it and I get a clean stroke that snaps into the mesh. On the top settings, I switch the mode to surface and that's pretty much it. Now I just take my time to find the right placement. At any point, I can go back into edit mode, grab points, and use proportional editing to refine the shape. I can also use Alt plus S to control the thickness of the stroke, just like with a regular curve. So there is a lot of flexibility here, and it's really easy to jump between all these tools in Blender. I focus on one side only because even for this grease pencil setup, I can later use a mirror modifier driven by a properly placed empty, and as you can see, it's already starting to look really good. Now I'm starting to add some details inside the ear. You can also switch between different viewport display modes, not just rendered mode, to get a better visibility of the shape and shadows. Here, I'm going to stay within the same grease pencil object and add a new material. When you get a new material, you get two sections, stroke and fill. The stroke will stay black, and the fill will be a pinkish color. Then, when I go into draw mode, I make sure to enable both stroke and fill in the top UI. After that, when I draw using the draw brush instead of the curve tool, I can directly see both outline stroke and filled area using the color I set up. I also enable stroke stabilization to get cleaner, smoother line. It makes the draw process much more controlled and enjoyable. I also noticed that the stroke thickness is a bit too large compared to the other parts, so I created another layer to fix that. Basically, I duplicate the initial layer and erase what I don't need. That way, I end up with one layer for the paw and one for the ear. And with the layer settings, I can also adjust stroke thickness after drawing, which gives me a lot of flexibility. Maybe that's one of the great things about working with grease pencil in Blender. We spent a bit of time figuring out what we are going to use for the eyes. At first we tried using a grease pencil, but it wasn't enough. Since the eyes are a spherical shape, grease pencil doesn't really match the surface properly. Then we thought about using a circle with a shrink wrap modifier, but that ended up distorting the overall shape too much. In the end, we just use a simple sphere placed correctly, which also helps add a bit of volume, which is really great. After that, we wanted to add some highlight to the eyes. We started with a simple black material, but again, grease pencil was not enough for what we needed. So we went back to the same workflow we used for the body, which is using textures. So we use the same shader nodes setup as before, and make sure we have one texture for the left eyes and another for the right eyes. So it's really important to save each texture early and regularly. From there, we can start painting and adding highlight on each eye like this. Look at these beautiful eyes and the cutest eyes I ever seen. Next, we are going to focus on the nose, mouth and cheeks. For those parts, we are going to go back to grease pencil. I make sure I'm on the correct layer, then I create an additional material and also a new layer as I mentioned earlier. I bring back the original stroke thickness and I'll also adjust a bit the projection with a small offset to get the shape I need for the nose. Then for the mouth, I do the same. You can also adjust the transform afterward to add extra offset if needed, especially since we have this kind of stylized shape. As I mentioned, you might get some interactions at certain points, so it's all about adjusting and refining the placement until it fits right. Once I'm happy with the position, I start drawing the cheek area and the little pink cheeks. It's kind of a similar workflow to using curves, but here I'm using a circle. I quickly create it, place it where I need it. As you can see, it's very easy to adjust afterward. It's almost done. For his little moustache, I use a simple curve. Same workflow, I start by deleting the vertices of the base curve, then I draw again directly on the mesh, adding a bit of depth and adjusting everything, just like I did earlier for the tail during the sculpting phase. I create a material with a simple black color without any specular, and then I adjust the thickness at the end of each strand. After that, it's just a matter of duplicating the curve to get us 3 nice strands on the side. As I start moving around the scene, I notice the outline effect is being applied to them, which I don't want. So I make sure to move those curves, outline of the collection that the outline system is targeting. Then I merge the 3 curves together so I can easily mirror everything at once. And there we have it, a really cute sushi cat with a moustache. I quickly wanted to add some highlight on the wasabi parts, and for that I just used texture, the same process as before. I added some strokes using an image texture directly with a bit of soft touch and some pink tones at the top. Final touch is to add some nice lines on the sushi part of our cat here, at the top and back of it. I just make sure to have good references, so I quickly jumped into Google to refresh my memory on how lines are drawn on sushis. Then I go back into the texture and using the same color workflow, I basically work like I'm using an erase tool while adding new strokes. I start plotting nice clean lines that bring that final touch and really sell the sushi look. I remove this part here, But in the end, I'm going to add a few extra white areas slightly above those sections, and you will see the final result afterwards. And the final things I want to add on this sushi strap, where I'm going to place some coral at the top. For that, I just jump into edit mode, select the faces I need, and this is where having a clean topology is really important. Then I create a new material and assign the selection to it. I change the color to coral tone, slightly greenish, just to match the vibe a bit better, and that's it. Now I've got a complete sushi cat ready to be used or played with, and maybe not eat it, right? And that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't hesitate to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I see you in 2 weeks for a new one. Ciao!